the developments over the last few weeks and the announcement of the first stage of a peace plan that would bring some economic and political stability to this region would be a major achievement. In terms of the economic implications for the regions, there are also things that will be covered in more details in the regional briefing that my colleague Jihad Azur will give. But maybe I'll turn to Petya if there is anything else to add at this point.
Not much to add. Of course, this presents an opportunity to build the foundations for a lasting recovery in the region, and we stand ready to cooperate with the international community on this. Just to say that for the region itself, beyond Egypt, we have actually upgraded the forecasts, and that is the case both for the oil exporters as a group, mainly due to the unwinding of the voluntary cuts in Saudi Arabia, but also for the oil importers. There we see the positive impact of relatively lower commodity prices, as well as the robust remittances and relative strength in the tourism sector, all of which have contributed again to the upward revision of the forecast for those countries.
I'm going to go to the gentleman with the tie, red and blue.
Thank you for taking my question. My name is Simon Atiba with DailyLera.tv. I was going to ask you, is President Trump bad or good to the global economy? And I wouldn't say crazy, but the tariffs on everything and the deportations of hundreds of thousands of people, are those things having a negative impact to the global economy, or is it helping even the U.S. economy? Thank you.
Well, let me take the question from the angle of the labor market here, because I think this is one of the important developments that we've seen in the last year. We've seen a sharp decrease in payroll growth in the U.S. From upwards of 100,000 a month to less than 50,000 a month. And of course, a situation like that in the past would have been associated with a very marked deterioration of the labor market. We haven't seen that this time around. The unemployment rate has increased very modestly. And of course, what's been happening is on the other side of the labor markets, on labor supply. So we've seen a very sharp reduction in the share of foreign-born workers in the labor force in the U.S. That have, removed themselves from the labor market. And that, of course, is something that is weighing down. You can think of this as another negative supply shock on top of the tariff shock. What is the reduction in labor supply does? It's creating tightness in the labor market. It's adding pressures in the labor market. It's potentially adding costs. It's reducing output. So it's potentially both reducing output and increasing inflation. So that reduction in the foreign-born share of the workers in the labor supply is something that goes in the same direction as the tariff shock, and certainly weighing on economic activity in the U.S. Now, there are other forces pushing in the other direction. We mentioned the AI investment surge. There is a fiscal policy that is becoming quite stimulative. The consumption has been fairly robust. So overall growth in the U.S. has remained fairly good. It's slowed down from 2024, but it's still about 2% in our estimate for 2025. But the place where you can see that reduction in the labor supply is if you look forward and you think about what is the potential growth for the U.S. And that estimate, of course, is very imprecise, but our estimate of potential growth in the U.S. has been revised down as well, and that's reflecting that lower contribution from a foreign labor force that was quite significant in previous years, and we're not foreseeing that it will continue to contribute. Now, the other side of this is what does it do to the rest of the world? Well, obviously, if you have slower growth in the U.S., per se, it's not a good thing for the rest of the world. There are spillovers that are coming from when an economy like the U.S. is growing strongly. then it generates demand for other parts of the world as well. So something that is contributing to a slowdown in U.S. growth is, in general, not something that is going to be good for the rest of us.
Okay, I'm going to go to the gentleman with glasses here in the middle. Yeah.
As Deepak Ajwani from Economic Times, India. Your MD, Kristalina, clearly told the world leaders and the governors, buckle up. Can we understand three things that IMF would want to tell the governors as well as the ministers across the world? How do they buckle up?
Well, I think what our managing director is referring to is the fact that we are in an environment, we've been living for the last 5-7 years, in an environment in which we are hit, the global economy is hit by fairly sizable shocks. Can be very concentrated. You can think, of course, we can think of COVID that was a one in maybe in 100 years type of shock. But even after that, with the cost of living crisis, we had the impact of military conflict on European soil. You had the trade tensions. All of these things are disruptive to the global economy. Now, for many countries in the world, these things are outside their control. These are not something that you directly have an input and can do something about. So the first part of buckling up is to make sure your economy is as resilient as it can be. And how do you make your economy resilient? Well, number one, you make sure that you have the fiscal buffers that you need, because you're going to need to use them when you're hit by one of these shocks, and if you don't have them, then the impact is going to be much larger. So making sure you protect the fiscal buffers. Second, making sure that you have the right institutional environment, so that you have institutions that are trusted, that can do their job, that have frameworks that are strong. That is also going to be helpful in maintaining expectations, in maintaining some sense of stability in the economy. And third, you're going to have to rely on trading partners. No country is an island that can do things on their own. And so making sure that the global economy, that countries remain part of the global economy, that they are integrated, that they find ways to deepen trade ties with partners where it's possible, is an important part also of building that resilience. And fourth, at the end of the day, growth comes from the private sector. It comes from adoption of technologies that have been developed elsewhere. Most countries are not at the frontier of innovation. Most countries are inside that frontier and catching up with it, or developing that frontier, making sure that the right efforts are made in terms of skilling the labor force, in terms of adoption of technology, in terms of infrastructure investment, so that countries can grow rapidly and unleash the private sector innovation and entrepreneurship.
Okay, we literally have 5 minutes and 25 seconds. So I'm going to take the lady with the white shirt. Then I will come back here to the top of the...
Hi, Mehreen Khan from The Times. You reserved a lot of quite harsh words for China's trade imbalances in this WEO. Probably for the first time in a very long time, we've heard the IMF talking about the nature of the Chinese trade surplus. I mean, is that at the behest of the US administration, which is very preoccupied by this? This morning, Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, said that China is trying to export its way out of its domestic problems and it's hurting the world economy. Do you share that assessment? And going back to the MD's curtain raiser last week, she put up a very striking chart of the state of the renminbi, which would suggest that China is engaging in some degree of currency manipulation to boost that export performance. Would you be urging Beijing's authorities to be taking a harder look at the state of its currency as well?
So on China's external balances, I would refer you first to the external sector report that we produce every year. That's the other flagship that comes out of the research department. The latest iteration was published in July. And that report tries to assess when countries have excessive surpluses or deficits. And that report highlighted that there's been an increase in global imbalances. There's been an increase in excessive deficits and excessive surpluses among different countries of the world. And it flagged 3 of them. as having excessive either surpluses or deficits. Excessive surpluses were found in China, as you point out, also in the euro area, and excessive deficits in the US. So I think we had a report that was very even-handed. Now, in terms of the economic issue on China's growth model, I think what I highlighted in my opening remarks, and I think that's certainly the view that we have here at the fund when we do our analysis of the Chinese economy, is that you have an economy where domestic demand has been very weak for some time now, has been very weak on the back of a property sector boom-bust that has not been fully resolved. We're 4 years plus in, and that property sector is not fully resolved. The real estate sector is still not recovered, and there are still a lot of potentially non-performing loans and valuation effects that are not realized in that sector. And that's weighing on confidence. Chinese households and businesses are reducing, scaling down their consumption or their investment because of that. So the growth in the Chinese economy in the last few years has been coming in significant part from the external sector. But what we are seeing there is something interesting, which is we see an increase in volumes that are being produced, but we see increasingly a decline in the prices at which they need to be sold on markets. And that suggests that somehow the market has a limited capacity to absorb all of that is being produced coming out of China. And that suggests that that growth engine, that second growth engine itself is starting to face difficulties. So our advice to the Chinese authorities has been for some time now, it's been for many years if you look back at our Article 4, there is a need to rebalance the growth model towards a sustainable domestic demand. And there are a number of steps that can be implemented to do that, and some of them I'm sure will be covered in the regional briefing, but that would pivot the economy away from being too heavily reliant on an export sector that is becoming more fragile in the environment we're in, and a more resilient domestic growth engine.
Okay, I'm going to try to squeeze one last question. We only have 1 minute and 27 seconds. I'm going to go with the lady with the glasses. And this is the last question. Don't get frustrated. There's going to be many opportunities to ask questions.
Hi, good morning. Camille Shukoya with the Africa Bazaar magazine. Could you provide updates on Africa? And I know a lot of the news this morning has been sort of gloomy. Could you give us any highlights, spots on the continent that are doing great? Thank you.
Let me turn this to Denise.
Okay, I'll give you an answer in 50 seconds, but as Jose said, I'm sure our African department colleagues will be happy to elaborate further on that. So for sub-Saharan Africa, we had growth upgraded, actually. Growth projections for 2025 are up by 0.2 percentage point, and same goes for growth in 2026. So we have 4.1 projected this year and 4.4 next year. And this resilience of the region has been supported by macroeconomic stabilization as well as reform efforts that's been going on, including in key economies such as Ethiopia and Nigeria. That doesn't mean that there are no vulnerabilities and there are no challenges, especially the resource-intensive and conflict-affected countries are facing significant headwinds, and based on our medium-term outlook also, we do see certain challenges coming, and we do believe that the low-income economies, including in sub-Saharan Africa, are facing challenges in terms of the per capita income gap with their advanced economy peers widening as we go. And the thing to do in such an environment is going to be turning a little bit inside, as Pierre Olivier was saying, strengthening institutions, further doubling down on the reform efforts, including revenue mobilization through tax reforms, and strengthen debt management, including debt transparency and governance, and doing other structural reforms that could unlock the potential of the region. Let me stop there.
Okay, I think that we did achieve a soft landing. So, as I said, there will be a lot of opportunities to keep asking questions during the week. And on behalf of Pierre-Olivier, Petia, Denise, the Research Department, and the Communications Department, we thank you all for attending this press briefing. A couple of reminders. The next press briefing is going to happen in this exact same room for the Global Financial Stability Report. Tomorrow we have the Fiscal Monitor, and later on the week we have the press briefing from the Managing Director and all those regional press briefings we've been mentioning during this press conference. So thank you. Any comments, feedbacks, media@imf.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you.